Drew went back to Washington to continue his work at the medical facility.
I think there was a plan all the time for Dr. Drew to come back to Howard and to eventually become the chairman of the Department of Surgery. Dean Adams was determined to build that clinical faculty as he had his preclinical faculty to provide an ideal environment for black medical students and black residents to get training. And Dr. Drew was a part of that plan.
He was promoted to surgeon at Freedman's Hospital and assistant professor of surgery at Howard Medical School. In the fall of 1940, Drew's wife gave birth to their first child, Bibi Roberta. In the same fall, England and Nazi Germany were at war. In early September, England was attacked by Germany in a massive airstrike. It left hundreds injured in the streets. They looked to the United States for help. Drew's old professor from McGill, John Beatty, was in charge of England's blood program. Looking for someone to run the Blood for Britain program in the United States, he first chose Dr. John Scudder. Dr. Scudder declined the offer, and Beatty then recommended Drew. In the fall of 1940, Drew took over as director of the Blood for Britain program based in New York City.
What was recognized was that there were very few people in the country who were very knowledgeable about this concept of blood banking and the whole concept of using plasma to replace lost blood. One of the significant problems that occurs during warfare is shock due to the loss of blood. Dr. Drew was one of the first to recognize that the replacement of the blood volume is absolutely essential to preventing or restoring someone who has gone into shock. One of the difficulties you had was that it's very difficult to store whole blood. And so his work on blood plasma was absolutely critical to the war effort because this was something that could be stored. And so he was sought after during this time of preparation because they recognized that with his expertise, a very, very new science would be born.
There were fears that Drew could not get cooperation because he was black. After 5 months, England set up its own blood program based on the United States model. Drew was promoted to assistant director of the National Blood Collection Program for the American Red Cross. Racism cast a shadow over Drew's work. As assistant director, he publicly disagreed at a press conference with the U.S. War Department's policy of refusing to use blood from African Americans.
I feel that the ruling of the United States Army and Navy regarding the refusal of colored blood donors is an indefensible one from any point of view. As you know, there is no scientific basis for the separation of the bloods of different races except on the basis of the individual blood types or groups.
Dr. Drew was first and foremost a scientist, and as one of the most knowledgeable people in America on blood, he clearly recognized that blood typing had absolutely nothing to do with race. And so he felt that it was his absolute moral obligation to inform the authorities of the fact that they were making a dreadful error if they were going to follow the customs of the society, which were the customs of segregation, and apply it to something which had no scientific basis whatsoever for that kind of an action. And so as a scientist, he felt that it was his duty to share that information with the armed services.
In the war, troops were segregated. African American soldiers were commanded by white officers and couldn't get promotions.
The black soldier in World War II seemed to suffer some of the same indignities that he had suffered in World War I, largely through segregated units, discrimination on the bases, discrimination in mess halls, discrimination even in the basic things that were denied them and were given to their white counterparts. So blacks had to not only deal with that, but they had to deal with going abroad and fighting a war that when they came home, the same indignities they were faced with. Lack of adequate housing, lack of jobs, lack of the basic things that as veterans, and things that they came to expect were denied them.
Drew resigned from the Red Cross in April of 1941. Drew went back to Washington, D.C. Shortly thereafter, he sat for an examination for the American Board of Surgery for certification as a surgeon. The examiners were so impressed by his knowledge about fluid balance in the body, they called in other examiners to listen to Drew. He was certified in 1941. The next year, Drew was named an examiner.
In terms of credibility, for one to take and successfully pass this exam, this is an exam by your peers, if you will, or exam that all your peers are requested to take.